This lecture reviews some key environmental strategies that can be used at food processing operations. The 4 areas that we will discuss include sustainability self-assessment checklists, process flow mapping, source reduction practices, and technical assistance providers. The first and most straightforward sustainability strategy is the self-assessment questionnaire. Here is the supplier self-assessment questionnaire created by Ceres, the same organization that created the Global Reporting Initiative. This sustainability tool helps corporate sustainability managers identify program weaknesses and areas for improvement. Here's a sample of questions from the waste management part of the questionnaire. The yes-no format allows for a quick scan of many topics, along with some areas to record specific information. In this example, the questionnaire asks if there are any waste reduction targets, and then asks for examples. So here is the question for waste targets, and then you can put in your examples right there. The Ceres questionnaire includes these 8 sections: waste management systems and training, all the way down to transportation. I found it interesting that the questions for each of these sections basically asked readers if their organization had taken the following 3 actions: if activities and outputs were measured, if programs were established to reduce environmental impacts, and if goals had been set. These questions are perfect for identifying weak spots and areas of improvement. Here's a second questionnaire created by the New York State Pollution Prevention Unit, specifically for the food processing industry. Unlike the Ceres questionnaire, which was more programmatic in nature, this questionnaire focuses more on specific operational activities. For example, the 4th question on this slide asks, have you considered using dedicated mixing lines for certain products to reduce changeover cleanup? Let me explain a little bit. Changeover cleanup takes place when switching from one batch of a product to another. Think of switching from chocolate ice cream to vanilla ice cream production. In this case, all the processing and packaging equipment would need to be cleaned to avoid contaminating the vanilla ice cream with the chocolate ice cream. Dedicated production lines, one for chocolate ice cream and one for vanilla, would help avoid the extra cleanup efforts as well as the associated energy, water, and chemicals that would be used for this cleanup. While self-assessment questionnaires are good for focusing attention and getting sustainability programs started with their pointed questions, process mapping initiates a much more targeted and analytical approach to improving production efficiency. Process mapping is simply the creation of a flowchart that shows different stages of a production process and then the related inputs and outputs. The chart on this slide shows a process map for a bakery that makes cakes and pies. Just in case you were wondering, process mapping typically uses process equipment as the steps in the diagram. So here are some pictures of those different steps. Once the process map is complete, an analysis of waste, water, and energy can take place. For example, in this table, each stage of the baking process based on BTUs of energy used per pound of product is detailed. The analysis identifies that the bake and pan washing stages in the process are those with the greatest energy requirements, 31% and 27% respectively. And here's another process map. Actually, it's a portion of a process map for the assessment of the solid waste and liquid waste from an egg production facility. Here's where the liquid waste have been identified. And here are where the solid waste streams have been identified. So sustainability questionnaires and process mapping are great ways to determine what needs to happen, but you still don't know what to do, and that's where source reduction comes into play. I wrote down these definitions and characteristics of source reduction because I think they're really important to know, so bear with me while I read them. Source reduction is any practice that reduces, eliminates, or prevents pollution prevention at its source. It's also known as pollution prevention. Source reduction practices reduce the volume, mass, or toxicity of products throughout the product's life cycle. Source reduction includes the design and manufacture, use, and disposal of products with minimum toxic content, minimum volume of material, minimum energy use, and or a longer useful life. And finally, source reduction is fundamentally different and more desirable than recycling, treatment of waste, and or disposal of waste. Source reduction can be broken down into these categories: good operating practices, equipment and process modifications, material substitution, inventory control, and product modification. Good operating practices are just really running a facility well. So you're inspecting and cleaning and fixing your equipment, and this could include cleaning refrigerator coils or addressing spills and leaks or conducting preventative maintenance. Equipment and process modification focuses on how a product is made. So this could include upgrading equipment or changing process attributes, for example, the timing or the configuration of how a material is made. So some examples include installing appropriately sized motors, or add an in-process water recycling system, or to use a less toxic degreasing method. Material substitution looks at changing the materials that enter a facility, either as a feedstock or as another product or supply. If you don't bring toxic materials into your facility, they're not leaving your facility either in the product or as a waste stream. Some examples include less toxic cleaning products or using ozone as an antimicrobial agent. Inventory control can definitely be thought of as a good operating practice, but many times it's looked at separately because it's so important. Here, the idea is to ensure that supplies are fully used and that none go wasted because they're off spec or out of date. So examples of how to do this include a first in and first out method, where any supplies that come into your building first are also the ones that are used first. You can also have right-sized containers and better labeling practices. And finally, one of the most sophisticated forms of source reduction is product modification or product redesign. The idea is that products can be designed to reduce environmental impacts at every stage of the life cycle. My favorite food example of product design is an off-brand swirl ice cream sold at dollar stores. The swirl is created by forgoing the typical clean-out procedure between changeovers and simply allowing the new flavor to run until it cleans out the previous flavor. Instead of being discarded, the interim product is packaged and sold as a swirl ice cream. Of course, the package is labeled carefully because each package has a different ratio of flavors. So just say you're a process engineer or a product designer or a sustainability director and you're searching for source reduction ideas. Well, you could hire a consultant, but where do they find their ideas? Well, thanks to the Pollution Prevention Act of 1990, the last major piece of environmental legislation, which also received bipartisan support, there are a number of technical assistance resources that are available to manufacturers. The P2 Act recognized that to minimize environmental impacts, companies needed to learn about source reduction practices. This was achieved in a few different ways. First, it added source reduction information to the toxic release inventory, which allowed companies to share their source reduction successes with each other. The P2 Act also provided grants to states to develop technical assistance programs for small businesses. And in addition, EPA established a voluntary set of programs based on efficiency and cost savings. The Pollution Prevention Act allows companies to share their source reduction experiences through the TRI reporting process. In 2015, over 7,500 examples of source reduction activities were shared, with good operating practices accounting for 40% of the examples and process modifications accounting for another 20%. This chart shows the number of source reduction activities for the food manufacturing sector, with ammonia, nitric acid, and nitrate compounds showing the greatest number of activities, and the greatest numbers being good operating practices, process modifications, and to a lesser degree, spill and leak prevention. In this TRI source reduction report, you can see that a cheese manufacturing company was able to get rid of all of its nitric acid waste. In 2013, this company was able to take 150,000 pounds of nitric acid and bring it down to below a pound. They did this by modifying equipment, by using a different process catalyst, and by also buying a state-of-the-art piece of equipment and replacing a high-energy unit. While the TRI source reduction data is interesting, it is also shallow. So the P2 Act gives grants to states to develop pollution prevention technical assistance programs that serve small businesses. These state P2 programs provide on-site visits to conduct process flow diagrams and make source reduction recommendations. They have workshops and webinars to discuss source reduction opportunities for specific sectors. They have guidance documents and case studies that provide more detailed information about technologies, financial analysis, and environmental compliance information. They also have technical demonstration projects, which introduce new equipment and show how well that equipment works. And some states even run internship programs for college students, introducing them to source reduction in a hands-on manner. Finally, when the P2 Act placed source reduction at the top of the environmental protection hierarchy, the agency developed programs that offered economic as well as environmental benefits. For example, Green Chill targets refrigerant emissions, WasteWise reduces waste and promotes recycling, Smart Waste seeks to improve transportation efficiency, Energy Star labels energy-efficient products and provides energy-saving tools and resources, Green Power Partnership champions green power, Safer Choice labels non-toxic products, and WaterSense labels water-saving devices. Most of these programs help companies measure and set goals for environmental performance, and they also help develop tools and resources and provide training and recognition programs for companies. In conclusion, you should know that food processors have a range of choices to improve their environmental performance, from self-assessment checklists and process flow diagrams to a host of source reduction practices promoted by state and federal agencies.